Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about the long essay question, which is a sort of new part of the APUS exam as of the 2015 exam administration. There have been longer expository essays on the exam before, but the format has changed a little bit. This video is intended to give you introduction to what you should write about, what the College Board is looking for in a long essay question, and we'll talk about some strategies on how to write a good one. So first, some basics of the LEQ. You will occasionally, if you're one of my students, hear me lapse into calling it an FRQ, which stands for free response question. The old APUS exam had 2 free response questions on it that each student had to write every year. But you only have to write 1 LEQ on the exam. Now, you get to choose from 2 different questions. So they'll give you 2 and you pick 1 and you write it. The 2 questions will deal with completely different time periods, completely different topics, but we'll ask you to utilize the same historical thinking skills, such as comparison or analysis of continuity and change over time. We'll talk more about that in a slide or 2. The LEQ counts 15% of your exam grade. You'll have 35 minutes to write it. The suggestion from the College Board and from me would be take about 5 minutes to sketch out an outline and a thesis statement, and then take 30 minutes to actually write the essay. The LEQ and the DBQ are what comprise part 2 of the exam. It does not matter in which order you write those 2 essays. You can write the DBQ first, you can write the LEQ first. The reader will find your essay in the booklet regardless of in what order you write those. So that's some basics of the format. Now we'll talk a little bit about how to actually going about writing it. So a good LEQ has to include all of these things. First, argumentation, which is sort of a fancy way of saying the thesis. Okay, you have to have a thesis or some sort of argument in your essay that addresses all parts of the question and does what they ask you to do. Okay, analyze something, compare something, that kind of thing. You have to use evidence. You have to support the thesis with clearly linked specific evidence that proves what you are trying to argue. This is a little harder than on the DBQ, because on the DBQ, as you're aware, if you're one of my students, information can sometimes be brought back to mind by a document. Like a document, you'll read it and be like, oh yeah, and then there was this. The LEQ, you don't have that assistance really, so you've got to know your stuff. That's why having this information, knowing so much about history and all of that is so important. There's a targeted historical thinking skill that is what binds up every LEQ, where they'll ask you to analyze the causes of something, to compare 2 particular events or trends or time periods, continuity and change over time, where you say how maybe foreign policy stayed the same from year X to year Y, and also how it changed from year X to year Y, something like that. And periodization, where they will ask you to maybe make a judgment call on what was a more important event in a particular time period as it pertained to, foreign policy or the role of women or something like that. So every LEQ will have something like that you'll have to do. Also, you've got to have synthesis. This just means your essay has to be coherent, it has to flow well, and the argument should be easily traceable throughout the essay, where everything you do ties back into your thesis and your overarching argument that you're making. So the first thing to do when you start the LEQ is read both of the questions that the College Board gave you to choose from, and then pick the one that you're going to answer. The questions will most likely come from vastly different time periods. Remember, they'll ask you to do the same basic thing. They'll both ask you to compare, to analyze continuity and change, all that. But the topic and when they take place are going to be pretty vastly different. If I had to guess, I would say you'll get one from before the Civil War and one from after the Civil War. But anyway, pick the one you're going to answer. The one you pick should be the one that you know the most about and that you're most comfortable answering. Okay. Analyze the question. Basically, you need to ask yourself, what is this question asking me to do? If the question was, for example, analyze the effects of the home front in World War II on women, both socially and politically. Make sure you understand exactly what you're talking about, the evidence that you're going to come up with has to do with the home front during World War II, and it's going to have to tie back into women, both their social status and their political status, for instance. Okay. Organize your evidence. The best thing to do is probably do a chart. So in that case, you might have one, column for social, one column for political, and then just list as much stuff as you can think of, basically, and then refer back to that chart as you're writing your essay to make sure you're working enough evidence in. But before you do any of that, you need to make sure you develop your thesis statement. You can do this in that 5 minutes before you start writing. In addition to planning and coming up with evidence, you can start sketching out a draft of a thesis statement. Make sure you take a stand in your thesis statement. So in this imaginary World War II homefront question, you don't want to just say the home front in World War II had effects on women both socially and politically. Okay, yes, it had an effect, but you didn't answer the question. You didn't take any kind of stand. You might want to say, while there were political impacts for women on the home front in World War II, socially they gained much more, as you can see, through them getting jobs and working outside the home, etc. Just make sure you're taking some kind of stand, like there was, this was more than this, or this was more important than this, that kind of thing. Once you've written your thesis, reread it and make sure it answers all parts of the question, and then it ties directly back into the question. Because if you don't have a good thesis statement, your whole essay is going to be fairly flimsy. As an AP reader, I can tell you right now, right or wrong, that after reading your introductory paragraph and your thesis, the reader is going to pass judgment on your essay. And if that judgment is low, it's going to be very, very hard to rise above that. Okay, you get one chance to make a first impression on this essay. So make sure that your thesis statement answers all parts of the question, takes a stand, is relevant, and lays out how your essay is going to go. Okay, be very, very careful about that because it is so important. I can't overstate that. Once you've done all your planning, it's time to start writing the essay. So first, obviously, you're going to write the introductory paragraph. You want to include a little bit of context and background information. This sort of leads up to your thesis statement that introduces the topic that you're going to be writing about. This doesn't need to be more than a sentence or two. You don't want to go into too much detail in your thesis statement. But then you're going to put your thesis there, and after your thesis, you can also include a very brief overview of the evidence that you're going to review. You don't want to go into a lot of detail, like I already said, but to give a bit of a blueprint or an outline of what you're going to be covering in your essay, that's totally fine to do. Then you'll write your body paragraphs. Make sure you're explaining how historical evidence that you're talking about is connected back to your thesis or your argument, how it supports your argument, for instance. And then make sure that at least one of your body paragraphs utilizes the historical thinking skill they want you to use: comparison, causation, change over time, that kind of thing. So just make sure you're doing all of those things as you write your essay. Some of the things to keep in mind as you're writing your essay, make sure, and this really applies to any essay, not just the LEQ, but any APUS essay or history essay. Use the third person. Don't say I, don't say we in any case. Never say I believe that. Doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter what you believe, so to speak. So just use third person. Use past tense. We're talking about history after all. So don't say Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. Say that he was. All right. Don't use absolutes. Very few things in history are absolute, so avoid words like all, none, always, never, that kind of thing. It's okay, and in fact encouraged, to anticipate counter arguments. What I mean there is it's okay to acknowledge in your essay that it's a complex issue and that you could see it the other way, but you're trying to say that your stand that you've taken, is the better one. So you can say, while it is true that X, Y is the better historical argument, for instance. So if you acknowledge both sides of the issue while still making a clear argument for your side, that shows a lot of complexity that a lot of essays are not going to have. Make sure you're objective. Don't show overt patriotism. Don't let your politics show, that kind of thing, because who knows how the reader is going to react to that. And then in the conclusion, make sure you reiterate your thesis and just hammer home how you argued that your thesis is the correct argument, and how you supported it throughout the essay. Here's what the rubric for the LEQ looks like, starting with the 2016 AP Exam Administration. The thesis is worth only 1 point instead of 2 on the DBQ. And to get the thesis point, you have to present a thesis that makes a historically defensible claim and responds to all parts of the question. So to give you an example of that, last year in 2015, one of the LEQ questions was, I'm paraphrasing, but analyze to what extent the French and Indian War marked a turning point in colonial British relations. You could not just say that it marked a turning point. You had to say it marked a major turning point, or to a great extent it marked a turning point, or it was not as big of a turning point as something else. You know, something that you can actually defend in an argument. And we've been talking about that with the DBQ as well, so hopefully that is not anything new to you. You can get up to 2 points for supporting the argument. The first point you get for just providing specific relevant evidence that directly addresses the question you're answering. To get the second point, you need to include what the College Board refers to in the rubric as a broad range of evidence. So a wealth of knowledge that directly ties back into whatever you're arguing. Okay, so you need to make explicitly clear how the evidence you're using is backing up your thesis, is backing up what you're arguing. The application of the historical thinking skill is the thing that probably most distinguishes the LEQ from the DBQ, other than just, having documents. There's 4 different historical thinking skills that you will see addressed potentially on the LEQ. Comparison, causation, continuity and change over time, and periodization. Okay, so how the rubric is going to set up will depend on which of those historical thinking skills you are being asked to address. So, for example, for comparison, the 1 point would be gotten for describing similarities and differences among historical individuals, events, developments, processes, whatever it is they're asking you about. So, compare and contrast, okay, similarities and differences. To get that second point, you have to explain the reason for the similarities and differences. So actually explaining, how those things came about, why there were similarities, why these things were different, that kind of thing. So that's just an example. And when I give you a rubric in class, it will actually have laid out what all of the specific targets are for all 4 of those historical thinking skills that we just mentioned. And for synthesis, it's up to 1 point, and it's the same as it is on the DBQ. Basically, you need to extend your argument somehow. Connect the topic of the essay to another time period, to another theme that's addressed in the course, or to some other field of study. Hopefully, if you're familiar with the DBQ, that is not very tough sledding for you. So, that's the LEQ in a nutshell. Keep this video close because you'll probably be referring back to it as we learn how to do the LEQ in class. And as always, feel free to ask if you have any questions. Cheers.